I'm telling you, this really wasn't one of their best episodes. I hope, but I thought it would be a good topic for us to start with. It's really a remarkable program. The show Radio Lab. I highly recommend going through their archives and just finding things you find interesting, and it's really extraordinary. So that's a pitch, and hopefully I can spread some of their wisdom as well. Okay, so what this episode was about is a pretty old. Did any of you watch the video, the Professor Sandel video, the Harvard video? He's pretty good also, right? He's a very, very good educator. And what they're all dealing with is it's an old philosophical, ethical problem of the trolley car, but what the reason Radiolab brought it back is because this is a question that had been theoretical for so long. In fact, some of the commenters on the podcast site were making fun of how theoretical it was. The reason why Radiolab brought it back is because all of a sudden it's becoming very practical. So let's just quickly review what the dilemma is, and then we'll take a dive into what the Torah has to say about it. So the trolley car problem is you have someone who is driving a trolley car down a path, and he loses control of the brakes. And at that point, disaster is impending, and he has two options. If he does nothing, the trolley car will plow into the 5 workers who are working on the track in front of him, but he notices off to the side there's another track where he could turn the car to kill a single worker over there, thereby saving the 5 workers in front of him. And the dilemma is, what do you do at that point? Do you turn the car to kill the single individual, saving the 5? Or do you just allow the trolley car to plow forward? Especially those of you who didn't listen to any of the thing. I'm just curious, what would we do here? Anyone want to volunteer? What would we do? It's a hard. You would do nothing and let the 5 die.
You can't choose, I guess, between who dies. And
you can't choose. Okay, so in general, in the millions of times that they've done this experiment, that's been a significant minority, but a minority view.
Well, there's an issue of Shea Valpas.
Wow, so you're like way ahead. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. But that usually ends up being a minority view. Most people say, well, it's better to save 5 lives than to save 1 life, or it's worse to kill 5 than to kill 1.
I just read an article about the same scenario, except this is real life. It was a doctor on one of those ships saving the people who are running away from all these sad places, and he could save like 10 or 1, but the issue was which one would be more likely to be successful. So it wasn't just the numbers.
So this has been coming up a lot in triage questions in a lot of these disaster areas. And there are a number of ways of doing it, either likelihood of success, but some people make almost the polar opposite, which is who are the patients that need the most acute, that are in the most acute danger, that need your help the most. Actually, Professor Sandel, we'll get to in a second. Let's just finish the trolley car and then we'll get to Professor Sandel's second example, which is, I don't want to say fun, but it's definitely an interesting one, yeah.
So when I was thinking about what I would do, I was thinking what I would say now and what I would say if I was actually in that situation might not be the same. Because I don't know how I would feel.
So with questions like this, we always need to acknowledge and really respect the fact that when people are in the heat of the moment, it's going to be very difficult for them to hold them accountable for the decisions that they're making in a split second. On the other hand, there should be a right answer, and we should be able to, in the comfort of a beautiful Beit Midrash, come up with a right answer, even if we're not going to point our fingers at the people who, in the spur of the moment, don't necessarily get it right, because we're going to have, I don't know, maybe we will, maybe we won't, but it's a difficult question either way. Yeah.
Is this similar to the real-life situation where that pilot Scully landed his airplane on the Hudson in the hope that his whole body of passengers would not get hurt, and he was successful, and then after the fact, the what do you call it, the airport and the lawyers, they grilled him, and he said to the people, I'm sorry to meet the point, he said to the people who were on the bench, and this is what I would have done, that he said, and how long would you have thought? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? He thought, I have 50 seconds.
Right. So I think that point is very true, that we need people, I'm a sports fan, right? You, especially this time of year in October, as the Yankees are hopefully on their way moving forward, reacting is often more important than thinking. But with the benefit of foresight or hindsight, so we should be able to and need to be able to come up with a correct answer, despite the fact that it might not always play out that way. Although, as we'll see in a second, the modern version of it, it will matter a lot. We'll get to that in a second. Let's go in order for a second. So the second half of the trolley car is, again, usually a majority of people would turn to save the 5 rather than killing the 5 and saving the 1. But then when he asks it in a different way, he says, now there's no, you're not in the trolley car, but the trolley car is running, you're on a bridge above it, and there's a fat man next to you. And what you can do is you can push him over. He would block the trolley car. You would kill him, but you would save the 5. And most people have exactly the face that you're making right now.
Oh, especially a fat person.
Which is horrible. No, the only why does it have to be? Why do you have to say that? It seems a little cruel. Why do you have to say that? Because otherwise, what would be the answer? You jump, right? You jump. So the reason why the philosophical, I honestly these days, if they were starting from scratch, I'm not sure if that would fly. But that's the way that they do it, to remove the possibility of sacrifice yourself, right? That's not an option. So therefore, it's shove and save 1 versus do nothing and save and kill all 5, right? And even though the numbers are the same, 5 versus 1, all of a sudden you get to scenario number 2, and people are far, far more reluctant to say 5 over 1, but it's very hard to articulate why.
And if you say it was a fat Rabbi, you know, and then you give that nuance that it's
Whatever it
not
is.
just an anonymous person, but, you know, someone who is,
Or
a gadol or, not a gadol, but
or
someone.
a fat relative.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, it's not. But now we're getting into very dangerous territory, right? In other words, now we're saying not only are we choosing one life over another, when it's 1 versus 5, so then we can make an argument, a moral argument that I think we could at least be comfortable with, even if it's not necessarily going to carry the day. I can understand why there might be value to choosing 5 over 1. Once we start getting into the subjective values of individual human beings, that really opens up a whole can of worms that would be very challenging, right? I don't know. Yeah. So I think so. That's a really hard question. He follows it up, Professor Santel, and I want to get to the Torah part, so we'll do it a little bit quickly. He follows it up with really an extraordinary twist on it. He says, let's say, so I forgot who brought it up, the case of the doctor and the triage decisions that you have to make in terms of treating people. He says, let's say, he humorously says, you have this terrible trolley car accident, and everyone comes into the hospital, and the doctor is there, and you have 5 people, each of whom needs medical treatment, and he could either work on the most severely injured for a 10-hour surgery, or there are 5 other people, each of whom need 2-hour surgeries, and he can save those 5, or he could save the 1. And there, almost everybody says, well, of course, why not save the 5 at the expense of the 1? Right? Over there, the 1 doesn't even have the default of being off the track. So why not save the 5 at the expense of the 1?
It goes also to, let's say, organ donations, will they give an organ to an older person who may only have 10 years to live anyway, or do you give it to somebody who's 20 years old and could have a whole life ahead of them?
Right, so the organ donation, there was actually, once I'm pitching podcasts, there was a really interesting, it's called a Freakonomics show, that was built off of a book, where they did an episode on organ donation, and in a doctor who won, I think, a Nobel Prize, because he put together the algorithms that make it so that you don't just have to match. He expanded the market to put everybody in, that if you find someone who's willing to donate a kidney, so then it will find someone who that kidney will match up with, and then find a recipient for you. It's a lot more interesting than I'm presenting it as. But I'm not sure that I can come up with a Torah piece to justify putting it here, but maybe I'll circulate it just because it's, you might find it interesting. But yeah, that's very much the same question. We're choosing, how do we choose when life is on the line, how do we allocate our limited resources? His follow-up question to that, though, is, let's say he has 5 people, and each one needs an organ, right? A heart, this one needs lungs, this one needs a liver, this one needs a kidney, this one needs a spleen, whatever it is. And he remembers that there's a healthy man napping in the waiting room, waiting for an appointment. So he could carve up this healthy man and save 5 lives at the expense of 1 life. So now how many of us would be willing to sign on for better to save 5 at the expense of 1? And the answer is nobody. The answer is nobody, right? So how come we seem to have such trouble staying consistent on these questions? So he then goes and takes it into a philosophy direction. We're going to take it into a Torah direction. The reason why it's coming up practically now is the driverless dilemma as we move apparently very quickly towards driverless cars. So they program them with all how to react in all different eventualities, and they need to, as unlikely as the situation is, it's going to need to decide, do I go into, does the car go, when things go badly, does the car go into the wall and sacrifice the driver, or go into the people and sacrifice them? You need to put that into the program before you can go forward with this new product, and everyone is freaking out over this 1 in a million, whatever the
So now
situation
you can
is.
have a kosher driverless car.
You can have a kosher driverless car. People are saying maybe you can have like a switch. Am I selfish or am I selfless? Right? You can decide as you go in. But apparently it's becoming real halacha l'maaseh. Just this thing that was just, philosophy students in dorm rooms for so many years is very, very practical. What we're going to see is that there actually are practical ways in which this will show up. So, so let's get to some Torah. So in general, the first source that we have over here is that we know the value that the Torah places on human life, and that the Washington Post article is just to catch you up if you didn't read the podcast. That's a little bit of a summary of the driverless car issue. So let's get straight to the Torah sources, to whatever extent we can call this straight. What we have over here is that the Torah is the Gemara is teaching us about the rules of martyrdom. That generally the rule is that the Torah tells us you're supposed to do mitzvot, you're supposed to avoid averot, but the chai bahem, you should live by those mitzvot and not die by them. And usually, if in averot you have a clash between, right, you need to violate Shabbos in order to save your life. You need to eat on Yom Kippur in order to save your life. You need to violate any averot. You need to, I'm not sure how it would go, you need to talk lashon hara to save your life. Whatever it is, right? Saving your life almost always carries the day. V'chai bahem, you should live by the mitzvot and not die by the mitzvot. There are 3 exceptions. one of the exceptions is murder, right? If someone comes to you and says, kill someone else or I will kill you, so the correct answer is, I can't kill that other person, even to save my own life. Why? So the Gemara says, and this is, I think most of us know it, are familiar with the idea more in English than in Aramaic. Mi yemar, this is the last line in source 1. Mi yemar, who says, Didama didach sumaktve, Dilma dama dahu gavra sumaktve. Who says that your blood is redder than his blood? Maybe his blood is redder than your blood, right? We don't know the relative value of the two human lives. We cut straight to page 2 for the Torah sources. We don't know the relative value of human life, and therefore, what gives me the right to take his life to save my own? Maybe his life is more valuable than mine, right? I mean, that we can understand that in one of two ways. Either that can be that we really, lives have different value, like you might have been suggesting, right? In other words, maybe the right answer would be, sacrifice someone who's not as valuable for someone who is more valuable, but we don't know. And therefore, because of our ignorance, we're paralyzed into inaction because we don't know the relative merits of human life. The other way of understanding it is that, no, what it's saying is that all life is infinitely valuable, and then infinity versus infinity, you can never, or even if you get into 5 versus 1 or something like that, so infinity versus 5 times infinity is still infinity, and you can never make those kinds of decisions because of the infinite value of human life. Either way, what we're seeing is we don't usually play that game of sacrificing one life for another, even if it's your life that you're saving, right? Even though in other contexts, right, you have the famous case of the 2 people walking in the desert and they find a canteen, right? Or one of them has a canteen, I'm sorry. If they find a canteen, that might be a little different already. If one of them has a canteen, so whereas the original one opinion says that you should share it and both die before you, right? If there's enough water for one of them to drink and make it to civilization. So the original opinion was share it and neither one should see the other one die. But Rabbi Akiva came and said, no, that's not the answer. The pasuk says, "V'chai achicha imach," that your brother should live with you, right? You only save somebody else if it's also saving yourself as well. That you can choose your life over the other life, right? Like they always say on the airplanes, put your mask on first so that you can help somebody else. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and that's how we pass it. So generally, we don't sacrifice one life for another. Let's do source 3 before we get to source 2. So this is a Gemara that this is an important Gemara. It comes up because it has 2 very hot topics in it. It has our topic of choosing one life over another. It also is the primary source in the Gemara about abortion. So I don't know, maybe we'll see, maybe we'll have the opportunity to revisit it again. What it says is, there should be sheets somewhere, and you see maybe straight across.
Sorry.
That's okay, I recognize the voice.
It finally worked.
It's forward, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Is there any way to make it less hot in here? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's a fantastic question. I don't know the answer,
It's actually machnik.
so I'm not really sure. It's a question we get a lot of answers.
I knew I was thinking about it.
Okay, yeah.
The well-known thing about
Yeah.
what has always, I didn't know how to ask the question, but how do we know that there's not a caravan waiting around the bed? Isn't the issue, what about the issue of hoping that the circumstances might change? In
So-
which case you preserve both lives.
So people wonder, that original opinion,
Yeah.
I think it's Ben Petura, right? So Ben Petura said they should split it and no one should see the other one die. So people wonder, why would he say that? right? So they give different, so one opinion is that the reason he's saying that is that we don't give up, that we're hoping that circumstances will change. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you can be a real, like if you know that you're nowhere, so then you don't need to, put in your false hopes on a miracle, you should very practically save your own life. Another opinion is that what Ben Petura is saying is that Chaye Shah also has value. In other words, even temporary life, right, what will happen, they will, even though neither of them will live long enough to make it civilization to live on for however many more years, but they'll live on for another few hours, and those few hours also have value that we can't put a number value on. So some people say that that's what he means, and you might end up back, this is not really our top, people wonder, according to Ben Petur, right, where the answer is, so split it, right, and therefore each live a little longer. What would he say if it were a non-splittable commodity, right? Let's say you have one parachute in a plane that's going down. So presumably over there he would concede to Rabbi Akiva that whoever owns the parachute should save themselves. He wouldn't say split it in half, right, like Solomon's wisdom, split the parachute in half, that presumably he wouldn't go there. Okay, so let's get to the Gemara. Rav Huna says, Katan harodif yital hatzilo ben asho. That if a rodef is a chaser, someone who is attempting to murder somebody else, at least for our purposes, and the rule of a rodef is that either the victim or a third party can go and kill the attacker to save the victim. Right? Why are you allowed to sacrifice a life in that case? Because you're sacrificing guilty life for innocent life. Rav Huna takes it a step further. He says, even katan harodef yital hatzilo ben asho. Even if the attacker is a katan, is a child, usually we don't hold children accountable for their actions, and therefore the element of guilt is at least clouded, if not removed. He says, still, even in that case, even if the aggressor, the attempted murderer is a child, still you can kill the child to save the victim's life. So then Rav Chizah attacks Rav Huna. He says, how could that be? So he quotes a Mishnah about a difficult childbirth. So Rashi is the one who fills in the gaps on what's going on here. He says that there's a woman who is undergoing a very, very difficult childbirth, and it is clear that if she continues to deliver this baby, that she's not going to make it. And therefore, what the Mishnah says is that pre-birth, the midwife should abort the fetus even at this last very, very late moment, right before childbirth. There's a fully formed fetus. Still, you choose the life of the mother over the life, I'm not reading inside because it's a little gruesome, Rashi's description, but he says, even at this last moment, you abort the fetus to save the life of the mother. But if Yatzar Rosho, if the baby's head emerges, so then at that point the baby is a baby, and therefore Ein Nogin Bo, Lefisha Ein Docha Nefesh B'nei Nefesh. At that point you can't touch, you can't harm the baby, because we don't choose what, or in the Gemara's language, we don't set aside, we won't sacrifice one life, meaning life of the baby, for the life of the mother.
But isn't he a rodef, the baby?
That's the Gemara's question. That's the Gemara's question, right? The Gemara, beautiful, right? Va'amai. What this actually, my students know, there was a moment a while ago when I was teaching this very sugya as the principal was walking by with an 8th grader and her parents as the door was open, and I'm standing there screaming, "So why can't you kill the baby?" So that was unfortunate. But within this context, that actually is the Gemara's question, right? The baby, why don't we consider the baby to be a rodef, right? That the baby is attempting to kill its mother, and therefore sacrifice the guilty life of the baby to save his mother's innocent life. Now, and if you're going to say, what do you mean? The baby's not trying to kill its mother. The baby is a baby. But you just told us that you can even kill a katan harodef. And a katan we usually don't hold accountable for his actions either. So if you can kill a katan harodef, why can't you kill this baby being born because of its aggression towards its mom, right? So that's the Gemara's question. The answer is, no, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, the Mishmaya Karat Fila, right? It says basically, who is the Rodef in that case, and in the baby being born case? Shmaya, Shamayim, right? The heavens. God is the Rodef in that case. What does it mean by that? What it means is that it's still different. Even though we don't hold a child accountable for his actions, there's an action going on here that we can identify and respond to. A baby being born is an act of nature. Baby isn't even doing anything. So you can't call a baby a rodef for being born, right? And so that's the Gemara's answer. That's the Gemara's answer. So the second part of the Rashi, the Tomar, second half of source 4, the Tomar. So Rashi sees the Gemara says that after the head emerges, Yatzar Rosho, that you can't harm the baby because ein docha nefesh b'tnei nefesh. We don't set aside one life to save another life. So he says, really? We don't do that? Ma said Sheva ben Bichri. What about the story of Sheva ben Bichri? Okay? I don't know until I learned this Gemara. I wasn't familiar with Sheva ben Bichri. That's a story from Nevi'im. What happened was Sheva ben Bichri was a morid b'malchut. He rebelled against the king. Yoav, the king's general, comes, and then Sheva was now he was running away from the government. He was chayav mita, because if you rebel against the king, you are liable for the death penalty. And he goes and he hides in a certain town. And then the general comes and he knocks on the door of the town, and he says, "Give me Sheva," right? You got to turn him over. And the pasuk describes this Isha Chachama, some anonymous but wise woman who made the decision to sacrifice Sheva to save the rest of the town. Because Yoav threatened, if you don't give over Sheva, I'll wipe all of you out and I'll get him that way. So she made what the Torah describes as a wise decision to sacrifice his life to save the rest of the town. So Rashi says, what do you mean? I thought we don't sacrifice one life to save other lives. Why was that a good decision on her part? Why was she allowed to give over Sheva ben Bichri in order to save everyone else? And this Sheva ben Bichri case becomes our paradigm for how to think about when are we ever able to make these kinds of trolley car decisions, right? Or triage decisions, whatever it is, everything comes back to Sheva ben Bichri. So Rashi gives two answers. Anyone want to guess? Why were they allowed to give up Sheva ben Bichri?
He was already condemned to death.
So number one, he was already condemned to death, right? He was guilty. He deserved to die. Usually we say we can't sacrifice one life for another. How are we supposed to choose between different people? It's not fair. Everyone is equally great. But like we see in the Rodef, sometimes we'll choose to sacrifice guilty life for innocent life. So even though Sheva wasn't trying to kill anyone actively, the fact that he was chayav mita is enough for us to say that we can give him over to save everybody else. Very good. That actually is Rashi's second reason. He says, Inami, at the very end, Mishum demar b'malchut haba, because he was a rebel against the king, meaning he deserved it, therefore that was a reason that they were able to give him over. Before that, Rashi gives a different reason. And what he says is, Hatam, in the case of Sheva ben Bichri, Mishum da'afilu lo masru lo hayanarag be'ir kashit v'sena Yoav. V'hei nehar genimo. The choice was not Sheva or everybody else. The choice was Sheva or Sheva plus everyone else. It's not like they were going to go invade the city, wipe everybody else out, and then let Sheva go. So since he was going to die on either side of the equation, therefore they were permitted to sacrifice him and save everybody else. Those are Rashi's two reasons. Now where did Rashi get this from? So now if we go back to source 2, there's a passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Trumot. Right? Trumot is in Seder Zerah. There is no Bavli, but there are Talmud Yerushalmi, Palestinian Talmud. And what it tells us is the following case. Bnei Adam shayu malchin baderech. There are people walking along the way. Pagulahem goyim, a bunch of non-Jews, encounter them, v'amru, and they say, Tnu lanu achad me'kem v'na'arogo tov, im lav harei anu horgim et kolchem. Right? Give us one person. We want to kill a Jew today, right? So either give us one, or I'll kill all of you. So then what's the rule? Kulan nehargim v'lo yimasru nefesh achat miYisrael. Okay? All of them have to die, and you can't sacrifice a single life. We don't give over to save everybody else. But, let's read a little more and then I'll erase. But if Avo, no, I'm in the wrong place.
Line 3.
Thank you very much. Yichdu lahen achad. If they specify, they say, not, I want to kill a Jew. They say, I want to kill this Jew. Give us him. Go and Sheva ben Bechri, like happened with Sheva ben Bechri, then the rule is, Yimasru oto, ba'al yeharku. Then you have to give them over and not get, then you're permitted to give him over and not get killed. Permitted, obligated, let's not get into that for now. Okay? Amar Reish Lakish says, V'hu sheyeheh chayav k'Sheva ben Bechri. Only, you can only give him over if he's actually guilty like Sheva ben Bechri was, but Rabbi Yochanan says no, even if he's not guilty like Sheva ben Bechri. So Rashi gave us two factors. Factor number one is he was going to die anyway. Factor number two is guilt. Now we get to this source where Rashi seemed to get his information from, and the factors seem to be a little bit different, right? What is the chief defining factor in this Yerushalmi? What's going to make the difference between whether I'm allowed to give him over or I'm not allowed to give him over?
Whether it's specified.
Is it specified or not? Am I choosing, or is the attacker or circumstance or someone else choosing for me? Right? Rashi did not mention that. And Rashi's first factor of it has to be that that the other person is gonna die anyway is not mentioned in the Yerushalmi. So it seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, right? Rashi's second answer, that's very easy. That's Reish Lakish, right? Reish Lakish says that the person needs to be guilty before you give them over. That Rashi brings us a second answer. That's a direct match. His first answer seems to be a little bit off. Now that last point that he needs to be guilty, that we see is subject to machloket. Reish Lakish says you can only turn over a guilty party. Rabbi Yochanan says no, as long as they single him out, then you're going to be okay giving over someone even if they're not guilty to save everyone else. So I think, this is not a big chiddush, but if we read it carefully, we'll see that there's not an inconsistency here, right? That Rashi really did get it from the Yerushalmi. It's just that the missing factor is built into the fact pattern, right? Yeah.
Was this issue, the way they discussed it here, was this also reflected in the Holocaust when they had to give over?
So unfortunately, there were all kinds of Holocaust manifestations of this
Does it come back
question.
to Sheva ben Bechri?
Everything comes back to Sheva ben Bechri. Everything comes. And there's lots of Holocaust responsa about these questions, and they all start with Sheva ben Bechri, right? And then the question is, how neatly does it need to fit into that model, right? So that's so much. So we see, in terms of guilt, that's going to be a big deal. It's a machloket between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. That's going to be a very high hurdle to overcome, because certainly in all those Holocaust ones, but in all kinds of anti-Semitically driven scenarios where this is going to come up, so you're never going to have guilt, right? So according to Reish Lakish, you're going to be in big. Unfortunately, in all these questions, you always want the answer to be, as tragic and awful as it sounds, you always want the answer to be that you can sacrifice, right? Because the alternative is everybody dying. So according to Reish Lakish, you have a much, much higher hurdle to overcome, that the person who's being sacrificed needs to be guilty. That's going to happen very, very rarely, right? But according to Rabbi Yochanan, you don't need that standard. So what does Rabbi Yochanan need? So he tells us that you need specification, right? I can't choose from among all the people who are there. You're not allowed to, you can't choose one life over another. But if the attacker or circumstance chooses for you, then it seems to be okay. why didn't the Yerushalmi mention Rashi's factor of it has to be that the person is going to die anyway? Because that was built into the story, right? In other words, they came to you and said, give us one or I'll kill everybody. So once that factor is already built in, it doesn't have to say if it's the fact that the person is going to die anyway. That was already there. Rashi didn't need to mention the specification case requirement, right? That you're not the one who's choosing. Because what were the two cases that Rashi was dealing with? Sheva ben Bechri and the baby being born. Right? There's no possibility of killing the mom, God forbid, and saving the child. That wouldn't help at all. Circumstance already chose for us. So in neither of Rashi didn't need to mention the requirement that you can't choose, because those were his cases. The Yerushalmi didn't need to mention the requirement that the person was going to die anyway, because that was already built into his case. So what we seem to walk away with is, if you want to be able to sacrifice one life to save other lives, what we need to be able to do is meet our 2.5-prong test, right? Number one, I can't be the one choosing. So let's say, for example, just a really tragic example, Sophie's Choice, right? So I once went, I was thinking, you know what, that's a great thing, I'll show it to my class. I watched it on YouTube. I can't show it to my, it's horrific. You can't show that. I was upset that I watched it. Where a Nazi soldier went over to a mother and said, you know, you can save one of your kids. What do you do? What do you do? So we already failed prong number one. Now, might there be another back way into saving a life over here? We'll get to that a little bit later on. But a classic Sheva ben Bechri analysis, we already failed prong number one. I can't make that decision. How am I supposed to choose one life over another life? That's what we don't do. That's number one. Factor number two is it has to be that the person would have died anyway, right? And therefore, that seems, at least at first glance, in a Sheva ben Bechri analysis, like we're going to fail the trolley car test, right? If I do nothing, then the 5 people die. If I turn, I save the 5, but I kill the 1. This 1 would have been fine if I do nothing. At that moment, am I allowed to turn the wheel to kill the 1 that would have been okay? It sounds, from a Sheva ben Bechri perspective, right, using that as our test, it sounds like that would be that wouldn't be okay to do. Now, unfortunately, this is the beginning of our analysis and the end of our session. So maybe we'll take at least part of another week to finish this up.
So in the case of somebody coming and saying, you know, pick one of your kids, for example, can you go back and say, I can't pick, I'm gonna leave that decision up to you to pick
And he
one?
said, okay.
So that I think is easy,
Yeah.
but unfortunately the guard was just being
Well, he
you know,
said he would kill both
terribly
of them if he didn't
sadistic
choose.
and said that if you don't choose, I mean, he just was torturing her.
Right.
So he wouldn't have done that. That I think you could do. Unfortunately, again, in the Holocaust context, these
Right.
things came up way too often. Okay, so I'm sorry for the cliffhanger, but we'll pick up a little. I'm beginning to notice that I sometimes have pacing issues over here. That's not everything. But, in front of my computer, it goes a lot faster. So we'll pick up Leonard over here next time. I'm happy to hold on to the sheets, or you're welcome to take them, and I'll bring more, whatever it is, and then hopefully we'll be able to move on as well. Yasher Koch, thank you all so much for coming, and looking forward to next week. So let me see how much I think we have left. I'll definitely send you the one that we're not going to talk about, that I mentioned, about the organ donation. So if we need to, I'll for sure do that. In terms of homework for next week, let me just see if we'll get to something new, or if we're going to spend the whole time finishing this up, and I'll be in touch by email. Thanks so much. Have a great job.